Hello everyone and welcome to another vlog. Today I'm going to show you how I'm editing three of my photos using Lightroom. I'm going to show you my techniques of adjusting the colors and doing the cropping and doing the white balance, the contrast, altering shadows, doing some dodge and burning, and all this is done to create a much more compelling and interesting image. My name is Toma, PhotoTom here on YouTube. I'm a full-time landscape and travel photographer, so if you're interested in this kind of topics, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel for more similar videos. In the description of this video, there's a link to my website. I have a few editing courses. If you're interested in learning more about my techniques, you can find there editing courses on landscapes, on general landscapes, or only forest photography. Now, let's get and start to edit these three photos in Lightroom, and I'll show you the way I'm thinking about editing and the way I'm post-processing the images in Lightroom. When you're editing your photos, a very important part of the editing process is to think about what you want to obtain. For example, this photo, it's a sunset in the Dolomites. This is made in 3 shots. It's a vertical panorama. And because of that, because I was standing right at the foot of this huge mountain, it's called Trecime di Lavaredo. Because of that and the white lens, I have this distortion. First of all, I will try to correct that distortion. Secondly, as you see, I have kind of like a yellowish cast, and for the sunset, I really like having that feeling of redness, because this is the way I interpret and I feel that sunset it's gonna be a red light filling the landscape. So let's start by just removing chromatic aberration and enable profile correction. Now, enabling profile correction did something which unfortunately it's not enough. It's still too bulgy. It almost looks like it has a belly. Now let's go over here in the transform panel of Lightroom, click on constrain crop, because we're going to do some adjustings and some adjustment, and we need to crop it. You'll see the minute I do the adjustment that some white space appears, and we're going to mess around with aspect. You see that white space that appears over there? You need to get rid of that. So we need to get it a little slimmer. I think that's the best we can do. If we go further, you notice that the photo stretches on vertical and we'll end up not having the mountains inside the photo. Now that we've done that, we also notice that we have some differences in brightness, if you want. Because I was doing a panorama, I wasn't able to use the ND gradiented filter. And because of that, I ended up with the upper part brighter and the reflection darker. The reflection is always darker. 2 stops, sometimes maybe 3 stops. So in this case, let's just use gradiented filter, go for the lower part, and I'm just going to increase the exposure a little bit. The idea is just to kind of match the two areas. Now let's fix the color of this yellowish cast. Okay, so we will go here in the hue panel, and you can just click on this adjust hue by dragging in the photo. You click on this, you go in the photo, you click it, and you drag it. Now, as you can see, it goes in a color that it's not that interesting. It looks from another planet. So let's go with the orange and change the hue. Changing the hue means I'm shifting the orange more towards red. So let's go slightly, and a little bit with the yellow. And now let's go with the saturation of the orange, yellow, and red. So now we have this image that looks a lot better. Let's go a little further with this. Okay, so now we can add some contrast to the image, to the overall image. And I'm using this by adding a point here on the tone curve in the highlights, and then another one in the shadows. And I'm dropping down the shadows. Now what I want to do is also add a gradient filter to the top of the image. And as you can see, it's slightly off. It's not horizontal. And I'm taking the highlights a little bit down, the exposure a little bit down. Let's see if we can correct it a little bit by increasing the shadows. No, we will correct it by using a brush. So now we have the upper part darker. And now I'm using an adjustment brush, increase the exposure on the brush, and let's just create some areas of light in these mountains because I darkened it using the gradient filter. Hit new, create a new brush, and let's have some light in this area also. Okay, now let's move to saturation and increase the saturation. Let's take a look at the before image and the after. Yes, it's a little bit powerful, especially in this area over here, but we can very easily use another brush and just take the saturation a little bit down if you don't want to have that over there. Now let's increase the exposure just a tiny bit on the entire image, add some contrast again to the entire image, add a little bit of details in the shadows, and I think that's it. Let's take a look again, the original photo and the final image. Let's move quickly to the second photo. Now I really liked how I had this light on the peak in the background, and I'm framing it in this in between these two rocks. So the first thing that I'm going to do is do an extreme cropping. Whoop. Let me just reset it and maintain the aspect ratio. And I'll do a cropping something like this. Okay, let's take a look. And now let's take the exposure down, and I'm looking at the stone walls beside on the edges of the photo. So I'm taking the exposure down, increasing the contrast, and now I'm using a radial filter on which I'm increasing the exposure because I want to increase the light feeling that you have, the light that it's already coming on that mountain in the background. So I'm doing something like this. Increase the contrast, increase the clarity, drop down the highlights a little bit because I see some blown out areas up there. Let's see if we take the shadows. No, let's take the blacks a little bit down. Okay, so now we've emphasized the background peak. Let's look the before image and after. And I'm kind of like, it's almost like I'm doing dodge and burning, but I'm only doing dodge. Okay, the burning side was kind of like was did by decreasing the exposure of the entire photo, and then I add light only in the area of that mountain. Okay, now these areas that are in shadow, I want to separate them further from the rest of the image, and for that I will use this split toning tool in Lightroom. And in the shadows, I will hold down the Alt key just to see the color that I'm going to introduce. And I'm moving, and I'm getting to this blue feel. And now I'm taking my hands off the Alt key and nothing happens until I increase the saturation. So I'm including some blue in this area of darkness. And in the area of light, let's introduce a little bit of orange. Okay. And now let's add a contrast curve. You add a point over here in the highlights, another point in the shadows. Increase the highlights first, and then decrease the shadows. I will also increase the black points, and let's see just a tiny bit. Decrease the saturation of the blues and aquas. And also on the highlights, because I see some blown out highlights on the mountain, let's take the highlights a little bit down. Okay, let's take a look. The before image and the after image. A much more powerful image, much more interesting. And the third and final image is a horizontal composition. And I want to emphasize the mountain. And for that, I want to darken the clouds in the upper part and also darken the slopes of the mountain. And I want to leave light only in the areas that I really want you to focus your attention. And this is basically dodging and burning. Now the grass, it's not that interesting. It's kind of yellowish. And because of that, let's first of all click on Remove Chromatic Aberration and Enable Profile Correction. But let's go and change the hue of the grass. It's yellowish? Yeah, it's yellowish. So if you want a much more greener grass, you shift the hue of the yellow to the right and you get a much more greener grass. But I will shift it to the left and go more towards orange reddish kind of feeling. And I will also increase the saturation of the yellow. And now I'm going to have orange reddish in the lower part, and of course in the upper part I will have some cyan. Now let's use the gradiated filter and let's just drag one down, and I will simply decrease the exposure, increase the clarity just a little bit. I will add a little bit of the haze. I don't use the haze that much. It adds a lot of artifacts, a lot of noise, but in some cases it works. And I will also decrease the blacks. Okay. Now, let's increase the contrast on the overall image. And why I'm doing this now, because I already have some dark clouds, and I want to have a feeling of the entire image before I move forward. Okay, and now I'm seeing that some of the slopes of the mountain have already become darker, and I will not need to probably alter them. Now let's just use a radial filter and add it to this area over here. So I will just increase the exposure and put it somewhere around here. Let's experiment with the position. Yeah, maybe this way it looks a lot better. So I'm increasing the exposure, dropping the highlights. Okay, and now with a brush I will enhance the darkening of the clouds. So I'll just take the exposure a little bit down, take the blacks a little down, and just increase the dehaze a little bit. And I will use a big brush for this. And let's see the effect that I'm creating. And the fun thing about brushes is if you don't like them, you just delete them and start over, or you just delete parts of the image, of the mask that you're using to create the brush. Okay, so I think I'm going to add another brush to the slopes, and I will, first of all, just decrease the exposure just a tiny bit, minus 0.24. You don't need to, when you're doing dodge and burning, you don't need to go to the extreme. Your brain will see the differences and it will be enough. Hit O if you want to see the mask, and the mask shows you exactly where that brush is taking effect. Sometimes it's very useful. Okay. And the upper part of this, let's kind of shift. I'm shifting the temperature of the upper brush a little bit toward blue. Okay, let's just look at the before image. So this is the image with no editing, and the final image. And of course you can see a much more powerful, a much more interesting image, and now your attention is focused on that mountain. So that was it for today. I hope you found this video useful. If you have questions or if you want to add something, just use the comment section below. Consider subscribing if you're not already subscribed. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.